How are you? It's been
Good. Good to see you. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
Awesome. Um,
Happy Halloween.
oh yeah, happy Halloween. That's true. In Brazil, we don't really celebrate it, so
I know.
yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for, agreeing to speak to me. And I
Yep.
watched A Chiara yesterday and I really loved it. It's
Oh,
an amazing
cool.
movie and the music is amazing also. And
Thanks.
I'm just really excited that, we get to talk a little bit about it.
Sure.
So just, to explain a little bit of what I've been doing, I've been writing about movies that were chosen by the Mostra here in São Paulo to
Hmm.
shown for the first time in Brazil. And one of these movies was A Chiara, and it was first shown yesterday, and everyone loved it. It was really well received, and because it really is a beautiful movie, and yeah. So I have a few questions for you
Yep.
regarding the movie, your partnership with Jonas, and
Hmm.
a little bit about the pandemic and how it's been affecting the film industry a little bit and your work. So,
Sure.
so my first question is that I know that you both went to Wesleyan, right?
Hmm.
Collaborated before on other projects and Beast and Wendy, I think, right? Uh,
Yeah.
when did this partnership begin with you two?
Yeah, it actually, I knew Jonas a little bit in college, but not that well. And we really got to know each other when he came down to work on Beast of the Southern Wild in Louisiana. And he was technically like the second AD, but actually was sort of like one of my like closest partners working on the film, like especially with the kids. It was like you just send the kids at Jonas, and he could handle like four crazy little girls like all at once. You know, he could direct them, he could cheer them up. You know, and we really loved working together and became really good friends. And then really kind of from that point on, we just sort of have this deal where like anything one of us needs from the other one on a film, it's like a no questions asked, we do it. And so on Wendy, we'd fallen behind schedule. There was like 3 days of shooting that I couldn't do. I called Jonas, who was in the middle of an edit of his film. He dropped everything. He flew to Antigua to direct the second unit on Wendy. And I wrote music for his first film, and then with this one, there was no question. If he wanted me to do it, I was going to do it. And so, yeah, like in the middle of the pandemic, found a way into Italy, got out there, sort of bubbled with this little crew, and did the film. But we're real kindred spirits in terms of just how we approach filmmaking, and we love working together. So
Oh, that's great. And it's very interesting that you've mentioned that he also works with, young people and kids. And, my second question was actually about that, you both have cast young girls, young women to be in your movies and that were not actresses before that. And do you find that to be do you find that that results in a greater connection with his movie and you with him in that way?
well, I think um, we have. I mean, our processes are unique to ourselves, but I think they share a lot of qualities, and I think we've learned and taught each other a lot, sort of in how we've made films. I think part of it is working with non-actors, which is really kind of its own. It's a kind of a completely different method of directing, to work with people that aren't coming from trained acting school, who just there's a different way that they perform that you need to kind of learn. And I think probably even more so is like, both me and Jonas really sort of immerse ourselves in the worlds that we're making films about. Jonas has made 3 films in this small town in southern Italy, Gioiataro. He moved there, I don't know how long ago,
10 years,
probably like a
I think he's mentioned.
yeah, like a decade ago. And when you're in the town with him, it's like he's like the mayor. You can't walk 2 blocks without 5 people yelling at him, kids running up to him. He's like hugging someone, fighting with someone. It's like he's fully a part of that. And I think that it's related to how we sort of direct actors as well, because we spend an enormous amount of time. I think Jonas has known Chiara since she was like 5. Or I remember meeting Chiara as like this little girl running around at the film festival that Jonas ran, and she would always jump into his arm. It's like the way that we both kind of work with our characters is through a sort of very like deep, genuine connection in real life. And so I think that we both sort of seen how each other do it, and continue to kind of inspire each other to kind of work in that way that, you know, results in definitely like a great things on screen. But I think probably for both of us, it's actually about how we live our lives, you know, and want to sort of live our work, and have it be sort of ingrained in kind of actually who our friends are, who we have fun with. You know, it's all sort of becomes the same thing.
Yeah, I feel like this, you know, immersion and this like genuine experience, it really shows in your movies and his movies. Yeah, and you know, the non-actors that actually are from that environment, that, you know, that's a huge like difference. And also it comes across as very genuine as well. It's not just like, you know, it is, and it just comes across as that. So that's really
good. I'm glad it translates, you know.
It does. So, you know, the music in the movie is just very strong, and it makes, you know, the spectator feel the emotions, experience the emotions that Chiara feels, right? And, you know, was that something that you both had in mind from the beginning? Was that hard? And how was the creative process of actually achieving that result?
It was tricky. You know, I'd written music for one of his films before, and then my co-composer Dan wrote for the second one, and those scores were very closely related. And then when we got to this one, he used a lot of the same those scores as like the temp music, and I felt like it really wasn't working actually, and then we needed to kind of invent a different sound for this one. And like the last one was, you know, there was more electronics, and this one really wanted to feel like very ancient. We wanted the music to kind of have this feeling like, and again, it's all, you know, every time I write music, it comes from character. You know, you're thinking about the character, who they are, what they're thinking about, like what, and I felt that really kind of what Chiara is going through is sort of learning that she's connected to this like ancient, very troubling, complex past, that comes from, you know, comes from Catholicism. You know, it really goes way back. And so we wanted the music to sort of that feeling to creep into her subconscious, this realization that she's going through, that she's connected to this thing that she thought, you know, didn't affect her. And so, you know, we wanted music to feel like it was almost being created in a cathedral, and that every sound that you hear could be something that you would find, you know, if you walked into, you know, the oldest chapel in Palermo, you know. And so we used, you know, pump organs and, you know, sounds that were all kind of very organic and very kind of, you know, out of, you know, that you wouldn't find in modern music, things that aren't necessarily practical, you know. And so we wanted that to sort of creep into her subconscious when she's feeling this anxiety of realizing that who she is and where she comes from.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's very strong. And it also with the music that, you know, they listen to, that's like a pop music, trap, it sort of creates a contrast that is really interesting, because you actually feel her experience, you know, through the music, and that comes, you know, that it's contrasted with the music that they hear, actually, not just that, you know.
It needed to be a completely like almost no overlapping sounds with all of the you know, stuff that she listens to, which is I will give credit to the actress who plays Chiara, is like 50% of that music is just literally what she listens to, and we were all like, you know, we got like an education and like Italian pop and trap, and while we were out there, it was so much fun.
Yeah, I figured, you know, I was listening to it, I was like, I'm sure that the girl actually listens to that music, so that's fun. And so it's also the music is it's in ways very different from the music in your movies, right? In and what are the differences between making music for other movies? You've mentioned that you've worked with Jonas before, and you know, for writing music to your own movies and your own screenplays, and what's the difference?
I mean, musically, it was very difficult, this one, because Jonas really doesn't want a score that is recognizable. He would say like, oh, I would consistently bring in stuff and say like, oh, that's too musical, you know. He wants the music to really sit in the background and sort of be in the wallpaper and not in the room, you know. And so he, and which is almost the opposite of how I write for my own films. My own films have scores that are like right up in your face, driving the emotion, you know, there to be recognized. And so it was a complicated process for me to try to figure out how to write music that doesn't feel like music. To me, you know, it doesn't have, that you can't sing. You know, I come from a songwriting place really, and so when I write a score, I'm really writing songs for the film and turning into score, and this had to be totally different. I had to kind of really readjust kind of how I thought musically with it, and it's a very different, you know, the scoring for someone else. You know, when you're scoring for your own films, you have a direct path, you have direct access into sort of what the film was about, what you feel the characters are thinking. It's almost part of the script, you know. And then scoring for someone else, you're really working to try to understand what's in somebody else's head, in Jonas's head. You know, what does he hear? And he's not a musical person, so he doesn't, you know, he can't tell you like, oh, let's do like you know, 3/4 minor, you know, he doesn't speak music in that way. And so it's a lot of bringing things in and, you know, bringing in different types of music. And there's a really varied stuff that I brought in for temp score, and he would maybe latch on to one thing and be like, oh, I like that sound. I'd be like, okay, is it the low sound here or the high sound? Which sound do you like? And we would identify, okay, he likes this instrument. I would write something with that instrument. And it's like a process of sort of figuring out what is playing in the mind of somebody else, which is a lot harder, you know, or definitely more, it's just a different way to approach it, you know.
For sure. Yeah. And in like instrument wise, was it very different as well? Did you choose different sounds in that sense also?
Yeah. I think that when it took a long time to, I mean, it was almost a month before we found anything that we liked, I think, you know, that because he, you know, when you edit a film, you put in temp music, you know, like just tracks that you like in it. For a long time, everything I was bringing in, I'd watch temp music would still be in, you know, like to actually get him to like something that we created originally that he liked more than what was in there, took a long time. And it wasn't really till we figured out that this organ sound, that we started to kind of unlock what sort of he wanted from the film. And so that idea of using several different tones and ways to play an organ was really the trickiest part. And also the other thing that was really difficult for us is also just figuring out where the music in the film starts, because the film goes on for quite a long time before there's any score. And when you do that, it's quite hard for the score to enter. Like it always feels incredibly manipulative if you're not used to music of it jumping into the movie in the middle. And so figuring out like what point the score unlocks and enters and how to creep it into the film in a way that felt very unobtrusive was actually the biggest challenge. And so the simplest piece of music is really the first one that's just a single note, you know, with a couple of pulses on it. But figuring that out literally took like 2 months, you know, of writing and stripping it down until it was almost nothing. And then it finally sort of felt like natural for it to enter the film in that way. So, yeah.
Wow. And what was it like to try to understand the character and, you know, maybe like make music that connected with the character? What was the process of, you know, reading the script and trying to get the essence of Chiara?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it's so, because for the first half of the film, you know, she's just like trying to be such a typical teenager, you know?
Yeah.
And it really like emerges in an unexpected way, like the depth of who she is and her, you know, her connection to her culture and her family. And so that was what I sort of latched onto as the key thing that the score was gonna, and it was all in this same conversation about like, when does the score enter, you know, when does it make sense? And we realized it was, you know, this dream of her father running away, and I won't give it away, but you know, when this sort of unlocks to her that there's this bigger world that she's a part of, that element of her character, and also sort of not just sort of the knowledge of this, but like the depth of who she is starts to emerge. And it felt like the score should come in sort of with these much more complex inner workings of her mind and who she is. Then and that was why it didn't belong before that, because she's sort of like any teenager, but like pretending to be putting on an act of sorts.
Yeah. And for like you said that the music was sort of like ancient and maybe like a choir, like not a choir, but like the organ and everything. What were your references? Did you like study maybe a little bit of Italian music, or things from the culture itself that sort of were taken from that and put into the music that you wrote?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, definitely sonically, we looked at sort of, just really old sort of church, organ, like sort of solo classical, religious music for organ. And so we looked at that, and, we tried using it in the film, but this was sort of where it got tricky. It was like, actually like putting that music in didn't work because it was too, emotionally it was too active, and so we needed to basically what we ended up doing was sort of taking a lot of sonic references from very, very old music and then bringing them into a more ambient modern sort of sonic space that had more to do with there's a couple of modern composers that we really looked at a lot. I'm forgetting the guy's name. It's Cristobal. We loved. So there were a few sort of modern scores that we kind of latched onto as really working. We love the Nick Cave scores. We've referenced those a lot for sure, as we're temping in the score. So we kind of took these sounds from another time and then brought them into sort of just a score space that would not interfere with really what was happening on screen.
Yeah, it really is like a music that connects to the environment, and it really is like an ambience music. It's not really it must have been hard to make that to write.
Yeah, the hard thing was had to do little. It was it was like how little, like trying to not do much is harder than it sounds with music.
No, so. For sure. The simpler it is, the harder it gets, I feel like sometimes. Yeah. And you talked about Dan, and how does your partnership with Dan work? You've worked in numerous other projects before, and how is that?
It's always a little different, this one was probably the most I've written before going to sort of work with Dan, and that was just a function of COVID, really. It was like I found a way to go out and sort of camp out in Italy with Jonas, and Dan couldn't do that, and so I wrote most of the score myself out there. And then in this one, sort of came to Dan with a lot of ideas that were pretty complete, and then he always, I'm a sort of primeval music, and I'm not like, I haven't studied, I don't play any instrument particularly well. I can hear it and sort of translate it, but when in every score, I sort of come to Dan with a set of ideas, melodic ideas, chords, instruments, and he sort of listens to that, and he almost does, he does sort of what I was doing with Jonas of trying to translate from what I'm sort of thinking musically into, a much more, sort of filling that out, orchestrating it. I'll come in with one melody and some 4 chords on a piano. Dan will figure out how to orchestrate that into a string section and horns and sort of all that goes into that. And then he also always sort of writes along with me. Sometimes we throw out everything that I wrote and we just write everything together. Sometimes I've written something that works, but the last figure doesn't, and he figures out what that should be. There's every single piece really has a different equation, but we're very good. Again, he's sort of one of my best friends and main work partners, and we just have at this point like a real language together to be able to sort of make each other better, translate each other's thoughts. With me coming more from the place of being a filmmaker and understanding sort of what the music is doing and at every point, and figuring where it should start and end, like all the sort of thinking behind it is where I'm coming from. And then he's coming from a much more you know, being a virtuosic musician and just an ingenious composer. And at first it was very much like I was doing all of that work and he was doing all the composing. And then at some point now he's composing without me. So he's writing for Pixar, he's writing for, you know, so he's at this point mastered everything that I was doing at the beginning. And increasingly I'm able to sort of write on my own musically as well. So we're kind of like learning each other up as we go.
Yeah. And well, you've mentioned, that he has this more like maybe like a technical approach to music, and yours is like more natural, maybe in a sense that you didn't study music. You're not trained in any particular instrument. But how does being a filmmaker affect your approach to music? Why is it different? How is it different?
Well, it's very like, it's very. You serve the story, in everything you do as a director. You're always thinking about how to tell the story best, as opposed to like thinking a piece of music on its own. Like, is this a good piece of music? It doesn't really matter in a film. It matters how it's affecting what's on screen. And so, one reason I think that me and Dan's partnership is so great is because like, I'll sort of come in with a set of chords and be like, like we can't use those chords. That's like a Miley Cyrus song. And I'm like, I don't care. It's it works for the scene, so there are sort of things that are like cliches or stuff that he's sick of, because he writes, he's writing film scores 24/7. And certain ideas, certain sonic ideas, you get bored with, and then you just want to do something different. And so I think the fun thing about our collaboration is I'll come in with something that he isn't like more complicated or interesting than something he could write. It's just maybe, more right for the scene, and it doesn't, it's using some chords that are like completely cheesy, so, but we can then sort of take that and work with that, and that sort of counterbalance works very well, for him to sort of push me to not just like play Rihanna chords over every scene, which is what I would do normally. But and then also, I'll sort of push him to sort of be more willing to, do some things musically he might have, ignored if it's going to serve the characters of the scene or whatever.
Yeah. Well, you've also mentioned that you went to Italy and that you stayed with Jonas. And the movie was shot before the pandemic, right? But how did it affect the post-production and the distribution and, the project overall?
Well, I mean, the post-production was crazy. In some ways it was sort of a dream. It was like I'd been sort of obviously with everybody else quarantined, the whole time. And Jonas basically figured out, it was impossible for Americans to travel at that time. When I got to the airport, they were like, "You're going where?" It's like, "You can't go there." I was like, "No, I had this letter from the government of, so he got me a pass into the country and got me out of, my house. And then we just had a very, it was like 10 people, and we got COVID tested every week. We had like, everybody was working in the same space. We had an amazing in-house Italian chef who was like cooking our meals so that we didn't have to go out to eat. But it was a real bubble, and it was like we're working all day together, we're partying together. It was like, but at the time it was like more people than I'd been around in a year or whatever. So it was really, really just an incredible experience, and it was cool to be that camped out and sort of live and breathe the film with nothing else going on. It was really just a great opportunity to sort of be able to do that on somebody else's work also, and to not be in my own head, and just fully sort of immerse myself in Jonas's world. So, it made it logistically complicated, but I think that for the film, it was great. It was like a real committed group that were out there. And as far as the distribution and stuff, I don't totally know. It seems like it's doing well. And it's sort of, it was, my last film came out literally the weekend that the pandemic started, and that was like a catastrophe, but it seems like Jonas's is coming out actually as the world starts to reopen. And so hopefully it'll, it'll have a really good life and get around the world, and people will get to see it in theaters.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned your last film, Wendy, and so how was the experience of the pandemic with that? It must have been really hard.
That was a disaster. But it was interesting. I mean, it's like when it's your own film. I worked on the film for so long. I did not want to promote. I didn't want to travel around and do interviews. I really desperately wanted, before the pandemic started, if I could tell you what I wanted to do after the film came out, I would have said, I want to go home, I want to read books, I want to write music and think about news story. I worked on that film for so long that I really wanted to kind of get out of it. And then I sort of like got.
You froze a little bit. Wait. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Now you're back. It froze.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, just kind of like artistically, it was kind of amazing. I just had to go home and get back to work on new things. For the film, obviously, it was a disaster. Like the week we were supposed to sort of go nationally in America is the week that the theaters closed. And so it's been a really weird process of it. It's still coming out in countries that are just now reopening theaters. So, and it's just been very surreal. I was getting pictures like all through the pandemic of like movie theater marquees with Wendy still on them, because we were the last film, but it was also, the movie was such a sort of like bizarre series of miracles and disasters and just like cosmically crazy things happening that almost exactly fitting for the shutdown, just as Wendy finally was born. So it all felt like part of the story.
Yeah. And do you feel like maybe like the streaming helped a little bit or not, as in terms of being worldwide in that sense, because it gets maybe watched by more people, or not? Do you feel like the streaming is just, it's not the same experience as watching it in a theater?
I mean, for me, it's not, but I think, but I mean, it's the way the world is changing and stuff. And, you're happy for people to see the film, however they see it, on an airplane, on their iPhone, whatever, you want people to sort of see the film, however they watch films. But certainly like, it's a much more detached experience to be like, oh, like this many people streamed it in this country across the world. It doesn't quite like there's something just as a filmmaker for people to see a film in a theater when it's fully, where the sound is full, everything that you work on, all the color, there's so much that goes into sort of just the version of the film that can only really be experienced in theater around other human beings. And so it's definitely kind of like when you're in year 6 making the film, you're imagining the theater with the people in it watching the movie on the screen, not someone on their laptop watching it while they're texting. Like there's something that you dream of, as you make a film that is irreplaceable with movie theaters. And so it definitely wasn't the dream of how a film would be released to be streamed, but you're still happy that it gets out there for sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's different, to be immersed in the theater with a movie, with the music and everything, and it's not definitely not the same. And you are a filmmaker, and that experience must be for you very, very different. And also, as a result, the work. So I have only other 2 questions. Has the pandemic affected any other projects that you're involved with right now that, it's sort of like getting better, the pandemic?
It's interesting. I mean, I've spent most of the last year and a half writing and researching, and the project I wanted to do anyway was in Louisiana, and so it kind of was the perfect thing for me to be working on. It's very small scale, it's just me, and I'm doing a lot of interviews and writing, and so it was a really perfect project to be working on as the pandemic was happening. And, you know, I'm still not that close to being able to shoot it. So it's actually worked out okay. You know, I know from my friends who've been trying to shoot in the middle of the pandemic that it's just been an absolute nightmare, first with projects getting canceled, things getting cut off halfway, and then now just even to shoot a film, you know, which is already one of the most complicated things you can try to do that with COVID regulations. It's incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult, and it's really especially difficult on you know, independent filmmakers, because really all the COVID stuff costs the same whether you're Mission Impossible or making a movie with your mom in the backyard. It's the same price, and it's really hurting independent film in a huge way. So I've been lucky enough not to be affected by it, but it's a disaster for sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, here in Brazil, it's also been a disaster, and you know, especially with the president and everything, people they're suffering financially, and also to shoot their projects, and you know, get people involved, get people together to work on a project. So I can only imagine it's been hard, you know, everywhere in the world. And so lastly, how do you see the future of the film industry after the pandemic?
Man, I do not know. I don't know. I mean, I have hopes. Like I hope that people go back to the movie theaters. You know, I think that there's a real danger between sort of all the streaming platforms and all the streaming content, and just sort of this sort of move into sort of long form episodic television. You know, you worry that sort of a movie, you know, like going to a feature film, you know, is something that is threatened by all of this stuff for sure, you know. And I think that for me, and that's really like my true love in the art form, is that sort of, you know, it's a very different thing to sort of watch, you know, a story stretched out over 5 seasons. You know, to me, like there's something to watching a film that's contained, and that going in the theater and that experience, you know, is really irreplaceable for me. And so my hope is that it'll survive, and that people will fight for it, you know, because I think it's going to require you know, the easy path is to just sort of slide into sort of all this sort of isolation that we've been pushed into in the pandemic anyway, and just sort of increasingly speak virtually, you know, watch things into our homes, not, you know, go out and experience art together. And I think that we're going to need to push and sort of make sure that audiences are going to need to demand that that they get to continue to experience that, because the easiest thing for these, you know, mega corporations that increasingly own everything that we're creating is to just beam it in and not have to do that work. And so, you know, I hope that people continue to sort of want and need and love the experience of watching feature films together live in movie theaters. So, you know, and I have no idea what's happening. You know, I live in a little bubble in New Orleans where, you know, it's like we do, you know, I don't always know what's going on out there in the world and what's working and not in the film industry. I try to kind of stay away from it, but you know, my hope is that at the very least that the theaters bounce back and make it.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, it's been weird with like Netflix and all the streaming platforms owning everything, and also milking every content so they can profit more. It's been weird. And also there's this thing here at the Mostra, at least, that a lot of movies are directly influenced by the pandemic, you know, in their storylines, and also, you know, with the masks and with the you know, with everything that we've experienced through this year. Do you think that that's like maybe a trend in the movie industry, that movies will directly speak to the pandemic in that way? Or do you think that people are trying to, you know, get far from the start of history?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure in like a year or two there'll be a whole slew of I mean, everyone was writing stuff, you know, all the writers were writing, and that's what they were experiencing. So I'm sure there'll be a slew of movies. But I mean, it was such a like, as far as like apocalyptic things happening, like it was so boring, you know, like day to day. It was like not like, I don't mean boring. I mean, it was obviously not, I don't mean it like,
No, I
it was
understand.
incredibly tragic, but as far as like the end of the world goes, it's like, I thought that we were going to get like tidal waves hitting New York City, you know, like something, you know, but it was so
Yeah.
like, you're at home, you know, and so it was like an incredibly uncinematic catastrophe, you know.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what people, I'm sure great work will be made about it. Speaking for myself, you know, yeah, I just wanted to dream of other things, and so I don't imagine I'm going to make a film about the pandemic, but I hope there'll be a good one that sort of makes us sort of feel and understand what just happened to us. Yeah, I hope that we all move on to better stories
Yeah.
fast. Also.
Oh, that's great.